The deadly western heat wave would have been virtually impossible without human-caused climate change. That's according to new analysis by climate scientists at the World Weather Attribution Network. Hundreds were killed by wildfires and temperatures over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Already another heat wave is on the way. But some Republicans are denying the realities of the warming planet. Here's Wisconsin Republican Senator Ron Johnson last month in a video obtained by CNN.
I think climate change is, as Lord Monkton said, okay? And by the way, it is.
Despite that stance from parts of the party, the New York Times reports that one Utah Republican is looking to change the way the Republican Party views the ongoing climate crisis. It comes as severe drought is rapidly shrinking the Great Salt Lake in Utah. The largest natural lake west of the Mississippi has been shrinking for years. The extreme conditions in the west are expected to cause the lake to recede to its lowest point in nearly 2 centuries. New York Times climate reporter Lisa Friedman joins me now for more on her reporting. Lisa, thank you so much for being here. So climate change has traditionally been a partisan issue. How is that changing and why?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And, I would actually point out that it hasn't always been a partisan issue. There was a time when climate change didn't come up much in the campaign, for example, between John McCain and Barack Obama, because both candidates, Republican and Democrat, agreed that this was a reality and something that the government needed to deal with. It really was, has gone back and forth, but, part of the reason for the extreme partisanship over the past couple of decades on climate change has no doubt been linked to very aggressive lobbying efforts by the fossil fuel industry.
And how differently are Republicans speaking about climate change now compared to when former President Trump was in office? Has there been a big difference?
Yeah, I think there's been a real struggle in the Republican Party, and that's part of what the story you noted was trying to get at. There are certainly Republicans that are very vociferously denying the science of climate change. At the same time, we've heard Leader McCarthy in the House Minority Leader say to his party, and has been widely reported, that the party really needs to talk differently and act differently on climate change if it doesn't want to permanently lose younger voters. Young independent voters and young voters, and especially young Republicans, have been telling their party for quite some time that climate denial doesn't cut it with them. They might disagree, and they do disagree strongly with Democrats on how to address climate change, on the policies that are needed, regulations versus other things. But overwhelmingly younger Republicans have been telling their party that climate denial is no longer an option. And in a number of very interesting quarters in the party, they are starting to listen.
Yeah, and I want to ask you a little bit more about some of these lawmakers. We mentioned the lawmaker in Utah, John Curtis. He announced that he was forming the Conservative Climate Caucus. Can you tell us a little bit more about what he wants to do, and is there anyone else on board? He, at last count, we reported about 60 members. I think it's grown since then. And, the way Congressman Curtis has described that caucus is an educational foundation for Republicans to become comfortable talking about and engaging on climate change. And, he has said explicitly that this is not about promoting any particular policies, but rather an educational foundation for his party. Congressman Curtis relayed to me that it took a long time for him to feel comfortable speaking publicly about climate change, even though he felt strongly about it and felt like it was something that should be addressed and that his party shouldn't ignore. And had all of the fears that of his district, members in his very conservative district becoming angry at him. And he said that he found out that when he did say at a town hall that, climate change is real, is human caused, and is something that Congress should address. None of that backlash occurred. And, he has described to me the journey that he went on that he is hoping to help other members of his party engage on.
It's a really interesting dynamic, and especially since his home state of Utah is experiencing severe drought. Are you finding that Republicans who are more vocal about climate change may be from states that are experiencing firsthand these climate emergencies?
In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. In some cases, for example, take Miami. There was recently a very unusual event in Miami, Republicans rallying for climate change, which is something you don't see every day. And in Miami, this is a place where climate change is undeniable. They see the effects of sea level rise, of sunny day flooding, on a daily basis. In other cases, it's unclear yet how members of Congress from the Pacific Northwest, for example, including those who are members of the Conservative Climate Caucus, we've reached out and haven't heard back yet to discuss the very clear links that scientists made in the report that you noted in your opening about the undeniable link between climate change and these severe heat waves that we saw in the Pacific Northwest.
I want to talk a little bit about kind of the economic argument around climate change, because historically Republicans have argued that climate change has been, based on economics. They've argued that following one set of rules, if other nations aren't agreeing to those same rules, that could, put the U.S. at a competitive disadvantage. How significant is it then that both sides are now crafting some kind of climate strategy?
It depends who you speak to. I think the reactions run from optimistic to skeptical. And those who are optimistic, people who have been working on climate policy for a long time, have said to me, it is enormous that, not for all of the party, but for much of the party, we are now talking about, we're debating solutions, not whether there is a problem. Again, that's not universal, but with important parts of the party, the fights now are over solutions and not the science of whether or not climate change is happening. It is. Whether or not it is dominantly caused by fossil fuel emissions, it is. Others are very skeptical, given the party's history and continued opposition to a lot of policies that would address climate change.
And I think there's a big question, too, about what this kind of change or shift within the party might mean for legislation. I mean, President Biden has made climate, a big part of the agenda. Do you think that any of these Republicans who are reacting this way, what that might mean for supporting perhaps some of Biden's climate proposals? Do you think they're there yet?
I would say right now it doesn't seem so. I think what we're seeing from Republicans, including Republicans that are part of this new caucus, is a real focus on what they would describe as free market solutions, investing in research and development, focusing on CCS, on nuclear, tree planting, all of which are good things, but don't include a comprehensive plan to draw down emissions, don't mention targets or even explain to the public as part of the legislation, various pieces of legislation that have been produced, how much emissions would be drawn down were these solutions put in place. Whether we will see Republicans, including those in the Climate Caucus, support something like a clean electricity standard, which President Biden and Democrats are pushing for, I think is unlikely, but there could be some unusual alliances in Congress.
So still a bit to go, but it's interesting development within the party, and especially as they recognize the electoral implications as well. Lisa Friedman, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your reporting.
Thank you for having me.